Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering the social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And my name's Sebastian Moore.
And welcome to our first episode post-rebrand.
Yeah, that's true.
Of the podcast.
Yeah.
Don't know what people think about our rebranding. Let us know.
And quite sadly, I suppose, you didn't introduce yourself as Councillor Hilary Salt.
I didn't introduce myself as Councillor Hilary Salt. No, I failed to win the election in Sale Central.
Travesty.
By quite a margin. It was one of the few Labour holds held by our current councillor. Mm-hmm. And you're also not introducing yourself as Councillor Sebastian.
No, I did even worse than you.
We have to try, don't we? We need to build on those foundations.
We've talked about this a lot, but I think that the political landscape has changed to a degree that really, really harms us as a small party that is struggling to get name recognition nationally. And in today's episode, I'm hoping to talk a little bit about the local elections, because I think there was some interesting mini stories that popped up as a result of it.
Good. Okay. So we'll do that first. I'm going to go on to talk about Greggs.
Greg? Who's Greg?
Greggs the Bakers. Whether or not we've reached peak Greg. So you can be having to think about that while you tell us about the elections, local elections. So these are elections in generally England, although there were Senedd and in elections in Wales and what do they call it in Scotland?
Holyrood. Well, Holyrood's the place, but it's the Scottish Parliament elections.
Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to talk mostly about the local elections in England, presumably?
Yeah. So trying to understand the election system in the UK is a tough job because it's very, very confusing. Certain places elect councillors a third of their council. So where we are right now, we're in Manchester council area, and they elect a third of their 96 councillors, so 32 wards, 3 councillors in each ward, and they'll elect a third of them this year, 2026. The second third they'll elect next year, and then the last remaining third they'll elect the year after in 2028. Then there'll be an off year, a fallow year, and then they'll start electing the first third again, which means that councillors will have a 4-year term. So anybody that was elected last Friday will be sitting a 4-year term. However, other places elect all of their councillors at once and then do it again 4 years' time. There are county councils, there are district councils, borough councils, unitary authorities. It's all very confusing, but the important thing to know is that there are a load of council seats up for election. Labour were defending the most, so they were those sitting councillors, and they were absolutely trounced, of course. And I won't go into detail about the specifics of the results, because if you want to know, you can just Google it, have a look on the Wikipedia page. But more or less, Reform did incredibly well and picked up something like 1,400 council seats. And they only had about 70 of those to begin with, which I think came from by-elections and defections and such. So they're basically starting from scratch, because even though they contested last year's local elections, those were for different places. If that makes sense. They were county councils and stuff. So this set of elections hasn't been contested since 4 years ago, if that makes sense. So,
I understand. Yep. And you didn't mention the Greens there. He's just said Reform
just
did
about
well.
to get onto the Greens.
Okay.
So the Greens did very well. We in Manchester right now will think that the Greens did better than they actually did, because they did incredibly well on Manchester City Council.
Okay.
So the Greater Manchester, which is the region that was created in 1974.
Yes.
The reorganisation of the counties.
Yeah, my dad still complains about that.
About it should be Lancashire.
He should be in Lancashire, yeah.
Greater Manchester has 10 boroughs, and all of those 10 boroughs work on the same, they elect every year a third of their councillors. So it's quite easy actually to understand Greater Manchester boroughs. And of those 10 boroughs, Manchester is one of them, which is a long, thin borough. So it goes from just outside of North Manchester all the way down to the airport. So it goes really far south. And the Greens did incredibly well, particularly in the south, which is a little bit posher, isn't it, South Manchester than North?
Yes, yeah. Although we were looking at a map, weren't we, that kind of explained Manchester is better understood on an east-west basis than a north-south basis.
Yeah, that's true, but particularly sort of north, west to south, east.
Yeah, okay.
That's the real distinction.
Yeah.
Because there are parts of northwest Manchester which are quite fancy. Prestwich is quite nice, and areas like that. And then there are quite deprived areas over in the east. You think of Gorton and Denton, the by-election that I stood in. So yeah, the Greens did very well here. They also did fairly well nationally. But if you look at the vote tallies, they got about 18% of the vote. So interestingly, this is quite weird, but the vote share seems to match up with the polling quite accurately.
Okay.
So people were voting along those, national polling lines. Certainly it worked out that way, in the end when you counted up the results. I wanted to go into a couple of interesting results then, nationwide. So let's start with Exeter St. Loyes. I don't know how to pronounce that. St. Loy, maybe, which was a ward in Exeter City Council.
Okay. South coast-ish.
Yeah, Exeter. Yeah, southwest. The Conservative candidate got 808 votes, 25.3%. The Reform candidate got 812 votes, 25.5%. But the winner was the Lib Dem candidate on 817 votes, just 5 more than the Reform and 9 more than the Conservatives on 25.6% of the vote.
Gosh, that's close.
Yeah.
Did they have a recount?
Oh, they would have done, yes, for sure. Maybe a couple of recounts, I would imagine. Candidates have the privilege of demanding a recount if they so wish. And we've joked quite often when I've stood in an election of, I got 28 votes, of demanding a recount just to keep everybody there. But you look at that, that ward will now be yellow on the map, painted yellow for the Lib Dems, and they will have a Lib Dem councillor, despite the fact that only 25.6% of the people that turned out voted for the Lib Dem. So over 75% of people, more or less, that voted in that election voted for somebody that wasn't the Lib Dem candidate, but they're the one that won the election. Yeah. Let's go to Richmond.
Okay.
Richmond upon Thames.
Okay.
Who do you think won that one? Any ideas? That's a council.
I think that was Tory country, really, is it not?
Not quite. No. So there are 54 seats up for grabs.
Okay.
And the Lib Dems are in control of that council. How many seats do you reckon they won out of the 54?
17.
54.
Oh, wow.
They have 100% of the seats on Richmond upon Thames Council.
Gosh.
Yeah. Despite the fact that only 51.46% of people voted for them. So around half of people voted for a candidate that wasn't a Lib Dem, but they are represented solely in that whole council area by Lib Dem councillors. Reminds me somewhat of Manchester I think it was a time in 2015 when there were, out of the 96, there was one vacancy and all 95 of the other seats were Labour councillors.
Yeah. And
it's so strange in a democratic system to have only one party represented, and that's not the idea, because you're supposed to have that opposition to hold them to account. Yeah.
That's quite a high turnout though. 50-something, you said, 50-something percent in Richmond.
That's 51.46% of the turnout voted Lib Dem.
Ah, sorry. Okay, so and what was the turnout?
I don't know.
Okay.
In an area like Richmond upon Thames, I'd imagine it was higher than other areas. Generally, turnout falls onto the spectrum of better off areas turn out, but more than less well-off areas.
Yeah. I was really surprised that in Manchester and in Trafford, I'm in Trafford, some of the, not very many, but some of the areas only had like 23% turnout. And I know people can't get that excited about local elections, but it just feels like a period at the moment where everything's changing. You'd think everybody would want to vote.
Yeah, and I think if you're involved in politics, you're so used to that it becomes a bit of a banality to mention, but it's worth mentioning and mentioning again because it reminds us that most people are disengaged from the political system and that we have to do something. It's our job not just to engage those that we think are going to vote, turn out for us, but also to engage those that don't want to vote. And you can understand why, really, when you speak to people and they tell you why they feel so disenfranchised. It makes sense. The last one then that I wanted to bring to your attention was Wigan Council, because that's near us. So out of the 25 seats, 24 of them were won by Reform. So it's absolutely dominated by Reform. The other one was won by an independent.
Oh, right, okay.
And who was the incumbent there.
Yeah, and so presumably there was all Labour before, was it?
Not all Labour, but mostly. It was a Labour council.
Yeah.
Now it's completely Reform. Well, they're electing third, so it's this run of elections has been dominated by Reform. So they won 96% of the seats on 46% of the vote. So a lot of these maps were appearing on the day of the election results, and people were saying, look at Wigan, that's Reform country. And it's so easy for us, even those of us that are deeply involved in politics, to just assume, oh, wow, Wigan is just, everybody's voting for Reform. Only 46% of people voted for them. So that's still brilliant. Well done them. Amazing effort. And Reform, I said this to you just a minute ago, it's really impressive. They stood in 95% of the wards that were up for election, these local elections. That is incredible for a party that is so new to get that infrastructure in place and to get people standing for them. That really is impressive. But it's just a reminder in somewhere like Wigan, 54% of people voted for an alternative party that's not represented. So I think it's so easy for us to look at the results, and the media often does this, and they have a takeaway which is a broad analysis of everybody's voting for Reform or everybody's voting this way. And I think often it's more nuanced, and we don't feel the need to perhaps look at it in that much nuance, but it's important to.
Yes, yeah. So you've picked one there that's gone Liberal. You've picked one that's gone Reform.
Well, there were, I think, there were two Lib Dem mentions there and one Reform. But it wasn't. I wasn't picking them because of the party. I was picking them because I thought they stood out as quite interesting results.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
There are also various stories developing of councillors that were elected and weren't expecting to win. I think there's a Reform newly elected councillor who actually works for the council because they teach in a school, and I believe that's not allowed, so they're going to have to resign their council seat and there'll be a by-election. Well,
I think then they didn't get through the appointment process because they turned out to be ineligible. So rather than be appointed and resign, I think they've not been appointed, so they have to have a by-election.
But they've won the election.
They won the election, but haven't been appointed as a councillor. Right. So there's a verification process.
See. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's also a newly elected member of the Scottish Parliament, a person named Q. I believe they are non-binary or something like that.
Okay.
And they are on a student visa. And they've been elected to the Scottish Parliament for the Green Party, which it's just remarkable because I would have thought that there are certain things we can agree on, which is you can't be standing for election if you're on a student visa. That seems so contrary to the interests of this country.
I mean, you shouldn't even be allowed to vote, should you? If you've not got a long-term interest in the country, you shouldn't. And if you're not allowed to vote, you shouldn't be allowed to stand. So that feels like the way to resolve that is to say those people in those circumstances shouldn't be able to vote or stand.
Absolutely. Question for you then. Do you think if you had James Adams was contesting a seat against Bob Wells, who would you guess was going to win that election of those two random people that I've just made up?
I guess it depends where the election was.
For sure.
If it was Leafy Surrey...
You know nothing else other than the names that I've given you.
If it was Leafy Surrey, I'd say it was James.
Okay.
If it was Preston, I'd say it was Bob.
Well, according to the to studies for these local election results, James stands a better chance because his name would be higher up on the ballot.
But isn't it? Is it not a surname that you're...
James Adams.
Oh, sorry,
Bob Wells.
James Adams. Right. So I was thinking about the first names and it was the surnames that were important. Sorry.
But what's
You
interesting
misled me there.
Well, there you go. What's interesting is when somebody's created a graph showing candidates with the surname A, B, C, D, and showing how much better they performed than would be expected, and it's a considerable few percentage points.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting.
So I need to change my name.
Exactly. Right. Now, what's even more interesting is that in certain places they were electing 3 councillors to a ward. So, like I said at the start, Greater Manchester councils elect a third, so we elect 1 councillor per ward. But London, for example, they've just done theirs, and they're every 4 years, and they elect 3 councillors to each ward. And the places, so there'll be 3 candidates for each party.
So you get 3 votes?
Yes, yeah. And imagine you're voting Green, and you love Zach Polanski, and you think Green Party's the way to go. You're likely to vote, X for one Green candidate, X for another, X for another. However, candidates with a surname that came earlier in the alphabet did markedly better than their corresponding candidates for the same party. So Reform, where this was most pronounced, when there were 3 councillors standing for election, the one with an earlier surname, 1 out of the 3 got higher vote tally 74% of the time. The second candidate winning was, so middle of the alphabet.
So like Moore, for example?
Yep. Only came first out of those 3, 19% of the time. And the candidate with the surname latest in the alphabet only came first 8% of the time. So there's a massive distinction. And that's all the way through. You can see the candidate that had the surname later on in the alphabet was likely to come third 68% of the time. So there's a real correlation there. And amongst all parties, there was the same correlation. You can look for the Greens, for Reform, for Labour, which is really interesting. Now, a couple of things. Yes, people are more likely, it seems, to just look down the list, and once they get to somebody they like. Now, I say more likely, that could only be 5% of people doing that. And that's the 5% that shifts it, if you see what I mean. Or 1%. If everybody is unlikely to change at all, but then 1% of people are more likely to vote for a candidate earlier, that could shift the results. However, I think it tells us something more interesting than that, which is that people are voting for a party, not for individuals. Because if you were voting for an individual and you had 3 Reform candidates, there's a good chance that the candidate with the surname M might be a terrific candidate, and you think, I'm going to vote for him. So you wouldn't expect to see any correlation, because you might have somebody voting for a Reform candidate as well as a Conservative, as well as a Lib Dem. But instead, it seems like people vote definitively for the 3 candidates of that party. So people are voting based on the party, not on the individual.
But is that, if they're voting based on the party, not the individual, would that not suggest that the order doesn't matter because they're just looking for the 3 Reform? And even if the 3 Reform are right at the bottom, they'd vote for those 3 Reform.
Yeah, but there'll be a lot of people that have voted only for 1 and didn't realise you're allowed to vote for 3. Or there'll be people that, have maybe, I don't know.
Right.
There'll be things like that.
Yeah.
But my point is that if they were voting for different candidates, you wouldn't expect to see that correlation.
So is there an argument that there should be random draw to see what order you come in on the form?
No, I don't think so. I think the argument is people just need to vote for the person they want to vote for rather than... I was thinking this about compulsory voting always comes up, particularly when we talk about low election turnouts. And they have compulsory voting in Australia where they fine people if they don't vote. And Australia has 90-95% turnouts.
Yeah.
And I always think it's a really bad answer. This is my opinion. It's like a bad answer to the problem. people are feeling disenfranchised, we'll force them to vote. That doesn't seem like the right solution.
I agree.
And I'd say something similar for this. People are voting. There are a certain number of people voting just for the candidate earlier in the list. I don't think the right answer then is, well, we'll mix them up. I think we need to encourage people to be more informed when they're voting.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I'm an M, so I'm not biased.
No, I probably am, being an S.
There you go. Okay, just a couple more things then. I think this election really shows us that there is a clear divide between the Greens on one side and Reform on the other. And this divide is felt, I think, in our daily lives when we speak to people. And you know this term coded? It's kind of an online sort of slang word, where you say it's left-wing coded or right-wing coded. I think you get that impression when you're speaking to people that when they say certain things, you think, oh, they're more likely to vote Green, more likely to vote Reform. That doesn't necessarily mean left and right. It almost means like perhaps a little bit more establishment, anti-establishment, something like that, or, populist and anti-populist, or I don't know. But the point is that there are these two divides occurring. And I think that was felt for me at the election count where I was speaking to a lot of people. And it struck me that last Friday during the election counts, I was seeing a lot of posts online, texts from friends, and people saying things like, why on earth would people vote Green? I just can't understand it. I saw somebody had said, all my life I've been very open-minded. I've always understood people that vote for a different party to mine, but I just don't get the Greens. I don't understand why anybody's voting for them. And whilst I'm seeing these messages and texts and hearing from people, I'm in and amongst a lot of Green councillors winning their seats. And so I have a chance to listen to their victory speech. And I thought it was quite interesting how a lot of them, they would say things like, love has won, compassion. And we've shown by this election that you can win when you fight against, the rich or the whatever it is. And I thought, if you, as a Green Party activist candidate, are imagining that the other side are, hating and bigoted and divisive, you wouldn't have any idea why they're voting the way they do. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be able to understand it. And that's for good reason. If you think that the other side are spewing hate, and then you see family members or somebody down the pub voting for them, you just think, why on earth are they voting for them? So it does feel like there is less and less of an understanding of why the other side are voting the way they do. Yeah. There was an article about this chap, Missan Harriman, who's the head of the South Bank Centre in London. You know the South Bank Centre?
I know the centre, yeah.
He got into a bit of trouble because he, when asked about the local election results, quoted Susan Sontag, I believe, saying, she said, when thinking about the Holocaust, 10% of people in any population are cruel no matter what, and 10% is merciful no matter what. And the other, this is important, the other remaining 80% could be moved in either direction. And I think that gives you an idea about how certain people are viewing this issue of reform. And you might say, well, why would they not try and win over people? Well, they are trying to win over people, but not everybody, right? Because they've just completely disregarded a certain amount of the population. Zach Polanski on his podcast recently asked his guest a question which was picked up online and highlighted as perhaps alluding to how he views people on the right. And I wanted to play it for you. You might need the headphones. So this was his podcast just about a month ago.
There are people, though, who would identify as right-wing or indeed even far-right. And no matter what humanity or community we put them in, they are set on destroying or pushing this toxicity. Do we think we can change their minds, or is it a case of building a society that doesn't include them?
Yeah, incredible question, isn't it?
Building a society that doesn't include them.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Up against the wall, last cigarette?
But it does give you an indication of what certain people are thinking out there. And this is the leader of a political party that's just done fantastically well in the local elections. And to be fair, impartial, true BBC style, this is happening plenty on the right of politics as well, where they people in the comments, interestingly, were saying, we agree. Yeah, we're going to put a wall around all of you, folks. And you think, yeah, the voices, the moderate voices that are keen on building unity, uniting the country and building something together where we all have a say, they are becoming fewer and fewer. And that's a dangerous place to be in as a country.
I agree. Yeah. That's really spooked me a bit, that.
Really?
Yeah.
You hadn't heard that?
I hadn't heard that, no.
He's just asking the question, I think is what he'd say. Oh, I'm just asking the question.
Yes, okay.
And I would say, just as a positive, the count was a really good experience and people were very cordial to each other, which was interesting. Labour and Reform candidates who were fighting for a seat seemed to be very polite to each other. The Greens were very nice to me. And I think we can sometimes get lost, and we all fall victim to this, of the online world where we think that everybody's hating on each other. And actually people in real life, when they come up against their staunchest political opponents, can be really nice and friendly. I know that's not the case in every council, heard some horror stories, but certainly in Manchester, everything I saw was really pleasant.
I was in Trafford. Mine was relatively cordial. I wouldn't say everybody got on with everybody. I had some nice conversations with some of the Labour people and with the Green people. The Tories weren't really much around in my count because just the way that the room was split up. Their kind of more Altrincham and Cheshire kind of areas were in a different bit of the room. Interestingly, two of the Labour campaign team from Sale Central came up and said that they thought I'd run a fantastic campaign, which I thought was really nice of them. It's easy to be magnanimous when you're not being threatened, isn't it? But I thought it was nice of them to say that.
Mm. What's your take on this? My thesis, my hypothesis about this distinction and this lack of understanding the other side at the moment?
Yeah, it does feel like the kind of polarisation means that people do seem to kind of live separate lives. I know people talk all the time, don't they, about echo chambers, and people only talk to people that they agree with, and the algorithms make it that way. And that's another reason, I think, why we've got to live more in the real world and, perhaps make sure that we're in circumstances where we get to talk to other people more. Because I think, whatever Zach Polanski thinks, I don't think we can just, divide up the globe and say, you people live over there and you people live over here. And, we all just stick to our own patch. I think we've got to find ways of rubbing along with each other. And it's that whole project of finding a way where we can come to some way of living together, way of pushing society forward together, that I think is the political project, isn't it? The political project isn't let's just divide along these different lines and live separate lives.
Okay, in the spirit of trying to understand the other side, would you be able to give me a defence of the Green Party's position and therefore why they're attracting so many people? So why is it that the ordinary person going about their daily life thinks, I'm going to put my hope in the Green Party?
Yeah, so some of the things I've been listening to are very much, from the other side. They're saying, how could anybody vote for the Green Party? They're anti-Semitic, all those kind of things. And I just don't believe that your ordinary person who put a cross in the green box does think like that. I think the person who put a cross in the green box maybe thinks, they quite like this idea of a universal income. I think maybe there's something in that. They're very keen on protecting the environment. I'm keen on that too. They're kind of outpouring about David Attenborough this week, because I found, a little bit sickening really in some ways. the BBC have run this. He's 100 years old this month, whatever. And they've just been running these puff pieces on him every day. And everybody they talk to is just, gushing with how brilliant he is. I mean, I don't have anything against him, but it's just like he's become this kind of godlike character, which feels very weird to me. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression. I do think people think I like the environment. I think they think things like, the Greens have argued for things like nationalisation of water, which we'd agree with. I think people think that's a good idea. I think there's a lot of feeling that people do think that climate change is a problem and think that the Greens are more serious about that than anybody else. So,
and do you think that's why people are voting for them, like in South Manchester? Do you think those are the reasons?
Yeah, I think it's those kind of they're a bit more left than the Labour Party.
Just interestingly, I think this has probably shed some light on the way that we think. But interestingly, all of the things you mentioned were sort of policy positions.
Yeah,
and maybe just caring about the environment is maybe a bit more values based, but I feel like people aren't really voting on policy anymore. It's more on vibes.
Okay, yeah. I don't know, maybe that's another generational difference, Sebastian.
So, okay, I think that was a very solid defence of the Green Party voter. Now I'd like you to do the same for Reform. Why are people... So Reform won, I believe, 9 council seats out of 32 in Manchester.
Okay.
And bear in mind that there haven't been any Conservatives on the council for years.
That's true.
Manchester is not a place where you get right-wing, quote-unquote right-wing politicians, and yet Reform won in areas, deep Labour areas, Moston, Miles Platting and Newton Heath. There was Charlestown and Bagley and Brooklands, these places where you just wouldn't have imagined a Reform candidate to win just a couple of years ago. So why are those people voting for Reform?
So you'll probably say it's vibes and not policy, but I'll start off on the policy track.
Go for it.
So I do think that those were places that were also very pro-Brexit. And I know the Reform Party isn't the Brexit Party, but in people's heads, it's the thing that is carrying on the tradition of Brexit. And I think particularly, we're in this situation now where we're effectively rejoining by stealth. That's what reset is. I think, lots of people think we've got to cling on to that mandate we gave our political class to leave Europe and to have a sovereign state. And having a sovereign state means not being in Europe, but it also means things like defending your borders. And I do think there's an extent to which, a lot of those people will be very upset by the mass migration that we've seen, not just the small boats, which I think people are still upset by. And obviously, in good weather, it's you see more of that. But I think they are also upset by the legal migration. And I don't think they think that some of the things that the current government are concerned about are things that are for them. So I think Jonathan Hinder on X, I think he was on Newsnet or something this week, wasn't he? And he was saying, you're talking about the Erasmus scheme, but, young people in Colne and Darwin and, Wigan and all those, the northern towns want opportunities here. They don't want to go abroad studying. They want a decent job with decent wages here, not the kind of things that the government are concerned about. So I think I was going to say a Brexit voter then. I think a Reform voter now is thinking about those kind of things. I don't really think they're thinking about some of the things that perhaps Nigel Farage would think of his policy positions. So things like the market and privatisation and, what you might call second wave Thatcherism. I don't think a lot of those voters believe in any of that. And in fact, I do think that it's really difficult to know what, not just Brexit voters, but some of the new Reform councillors what kind of ideology they'll have, what they will believe in, because, I think they'll probably have done enough vetting to make sure people aren't nutters. But I don't think they'll be thinking, well, are you somebody who believes in the free market and globalisation? Or are you somebody who believes in more state aid, more help for small businesses? I don't think they'll have done anything like that.
Mm.
So I think you get a real mixed bag of people now in reform. And I don't think there's any. And how do the reform leadership cohere all those people around a set of policies that are as yet kind of a bit of a mystery?
So hopefully, if you're listening to this and you are more inclined to be green, Hilary has now just given you a good summary of what many reform voters are thinking when they vote for reform. And likewise, if you think, I can't understand anybody that would vote green, hopefully that kind of gives you an indication. I do think that there are things in common, much more in common than people would make out and the media would make out. And you alluded to some of them then. And I think that if you have a chance to really get underneath an issue with a Green Party voter who's worried about the cost of living or the let's say energy problems, I think you'd find similar concerns with the Reform voter, which is interesting. And I think that's where the SDP, that's what the reason we exist, because we think that the analysis that Reform and Greens have got of the political situation is wrong. And actually the people that are voting for them are both right in their own ways. Yeah. And there is actually a moderate position to take, which includes and overlaps a lot of those things. That's why I think our existence is quite exciting where we go from here.
So if you looked at an example of, say, housing costs, Greens might say the answer is rent control. Reform might say the answer is unleash the market. And we would say the answer is state needs to build houses.
Yes, exactly. And both Reform and Green voters would want the same thing, which is, a more reasonable housing market with cheaper housing costs and such. Yeah. But how you get there is not that top-down solution of just we'll cap what people can charge, nor is it just loosen planning regulations. Mm-hmm. It involves actually the state getting involved. So
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on because we were on that for a long time.
Okay.
I had lots of things to kind of go into. But,
my bit might be a little shorter, so that's okay.
I'm excited for your bit because I like Greggs.
You do like Greggs, don't you? Yeah.
I'm hoping you'll tell me that they're a really decent business with good morals and British owned.
Yeah. Well, I am going to say broadly that.
I can still eat there.
I am going to say that they're under a bit of attack for being precisely that, so that's interesting. So there's a bit of a discussion at the moment about whether we've reached peak Greggs.
Okay.
And anybody who's been down the high street recently will probably have seen, a new Greggs opening every so often. So, they've certainly really increased their coverage. But interestingly, their share price has now been starting to go up a little bit, but it has been quite depressed recently. And they've come under quite a lot of criticism from some of what we might call the activist investors. These are the big fund managers who often, they will perhaps have a position on the board of some businesses, and they want to really drive businesses in the way that they want them to go. And some of the criticisms they've made of Greggs is that they're not robust enough in doing things like cutting costs, and that they have one of the things that's interesting about Greggs is that they have very low levels of borrowing. Now, many people who advise businesses and many kind of business specialists would say that's not very efficient for the shareholders, because if you borrowed a lot of money, for example, to build new shops, you would give the people that you borrowed the money from a certain level of return, let's say a 10% bond return, whereas you might make 15% return and the difference goes to your shareholders. So it's a way of kind of gearing up the profit that the shareholders get is to have much more borrowing. Now, actually, I think Greggs have been very sensible in not going down that route. And they have, you might call it the financialisation of businesses, where, businesses concentrate less on making widgets or pasties, and they concentrate more on the kind of financial structuring of their business. So, how much debt to have, all that kind of stuff. And actually, I think it's entirely right that businesses should concentrate on making the thing that they're there to make. So I'm very supportive of Greggs. They've recently put out a statement to kind of reassure the market because of the criticism that they've been under. They think that their profits, pre-tax profits this year, will be around about the same as last year, which I think is about 170 million. Got turnover of, I think, just over it's about 2.25 billion. Do you know how many shops they've got? Do you want to hazard a guess at how many shops they've got in the UK?
Oof. Gosh, that's such a hard question.
Yeah, it is.
So it's thousands. It would be, my guess would be like 30,000.
Oh God, no, about 2,700.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just under 3,000.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Manchester.
I know.
There's Greggs on every corner. Isn't there?
Yeah, I think they are more coming up north and down south.
Interesting. Is it Gales down south?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. They are obviously facing a lot of challenges. So some of the things we've talked about before, they obviously have quite high labour costs because you have to have somebody in the shop selling the sausage rolls. And so they'll have been hit by the increase in employer NI last year, by the increase in minimum wage this year. So, quite a lot of pressure coming from staff costs.
And because of their business model, they have very small shops, often staffed by one or two people, so they can't cut down on staff costs, unlike other companies that are bigger.
That's right. Good. Yeah. Oh, you make a businessman of you yet, Sebastian? So staff costs have been problematic. Obviously, they have other big costs are food costs and energy costs. They have hedged about 85% of their energy costs. So do you want to explain what that means?
Yes, please.
So they've kind of bought the fuel in advance.
Oh, right, yeah.
So
Is that what hedged means?
Yeah, hedged means that you pay in advance to fix the price.
Because you think it's going to go up.
Because you think the price is going to go up, exactly. And quite a lot of their food costs they've hedged as well. So they've kind of bought in advance from the people who make flour.
If there's uncertainty in the market, and a lot of businesses are doing that, it's going to push the prices of those things up, and it will create that sort of artificial spike. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think that's probably a lot less of a worry than your worry about how much those costs might go up. Obviously, the conflict in the Middle East and the Straits of Hormuz being closed, and that affects fuel costs and fertilizer costs, both of which are important in food costs. So there are lots of challenges, and you've probably noticed those challenges in the price that Greggs are charging. So do you know what a Greggs breakfast meal deal costs now?
Oh, I've never had a breakfast meal deal.
Oh, okay. So it's £3.15.
Okay.
It was £2.95, and then it broke the £3 barrier. Went up to £3.15. I think they're going to increase it again shortly to £3.25. So that's the kind of bacon roll and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Yeah.
Roll, is it? Bacon roll?
Bacon roll, yeah.
Or bap or...
No, bacon roll.
Bomb.
Yeah. You can have a baguette, but that's the kind of premium one.
Okay.
So you have to pay more for that. I don't actually know the price of it off the top of my head. So they have been forced to do things like push up the price of their offerings. And they're also experimenting with things like customer-led opening times. So certainly I generally think of Greggs as a morning thing. It's a breakfast or maybe a mid-morning sausage roll thing. But they do have quite a lot of outlets that now open very late at night. So you've probably been past the Greggs in St Peter's Square in Manchester, haven't you?
Yeah, of course.
Which opens late. And on lots of university campuses, they have late opening Greggs. because
Are we getting paid for this? Are they sponsoring us today? They better be. At least a few free sausage rolls.
we're very happy to receive any sausage rolls you want to send our way, Greggs. Thank you very much. So they are developing different strategies to adapt to the challenges they face. They're also looking to expand abroad. They're going to open a shop in, right, I'm going to get the pronunciation of this wrong now, in Tenerife. Is it Tenerife?
No, Tenerife's fine. I mean,
Tenerife,
that's
okay.
the anglicised pronunciation. I was sort of squirming because of the thought of a Greggs abroad, but I'm like an advocate of I guess like national culture and how, you know, I want to go on holiday and experience the cuisines and the culture of that country. I don't want Greggs. Weatherspoons have just opened one in Alicante Airport, which makes me feel a bit uneasy as well.
When I was learning Spanish at the Cervantes Institute in Manchester, it was just after work, so you used to have to try and grab something to eat on your way there, on your way to Spanish. And there was a nice little chippy opposite, but you can't really take chips into a classroom. So one day I just bought a pie, and I was just, guzzling it down before we started our lesson, and the teacher came in, and she said, "¿Qué estáis comiendo?" And having no clue what pie is in Spanish.
Oh, no.
I said, "Como pie?" And she said, paella. And I went, "No, pie."
Pie.
So my friends still take the mickey out of me for that little
Very good
incident. Anyway, you've thrown me off course now. Tenerife. They did previously open some shops in Belgium, but that didn't work very well for them. So this is a second attempt at international expansion for Greggs. Probably called Gregos in Spanish, isn't it? Customer-led opening hours and expansion. These are some of the things that they're doing to push forward their levels of profit and turnover. But they are still coming under quite a lot of fire from the activist investors. So people like Millennium, GLG, these are the kind of people who, what they do is they short sell the stock.
So these are big funds.
These are big funds, yeah. So when short sell the stock means that they don't hold Greggs, but they borrow it from somebody else for a fee, borrow the shares. So let's say they borrow 100 shares. They then sell those to somebody else in the market now because they expect the price to go down, and they will then buy them at a cheaper price and give them back to the people that they lent them from.
Of course, this is what happened during the Great Financial Crash.
That's right.
And
the
film The Big Short.
Yes.
It's all about this.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite films.
Is it right? Okay, that's how you know what short selling is.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's been a lot of. I think it's the most short sold stock in the FTSE. Greggs. About 10% of its stock is short sold.
I need to go and buy some more sausage rolls.
You do. Or chicken rolls. Sorry, I meant to mention the chicken roll.
To these big funds.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting because the share price has been going up recently, and so they will have burnt the fingers of those big funds. So
and they're
good
having
on
to
them.
Pay interest.
Yeah,
right, on the stock that they've on those. I can't think what do you call it when you
stock lending.
There's a way of doing it. I can't think what it is in the Big Short.
Is it haircut?
No, it's a word like derivatives or.
Right, okay, yeah.
I can't think of the exact word.
Okay, yeah.
But it costs if the stock starts going up, it costs them more and more.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
hold out, and they'll be holding out and making the argument that no, it will go down at some point.
Yeah. Margin payments. Are you thinking of?
I can't think of the exact word.
I'm determined to find out what the thing. Anyway, so yes, very good that the fingers of those fund managers have been burnt, not just on the sausage roll. They're often too hot, aren't they? They're either too hot or too cold, I find.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, I did fail to mention in the how are they protecting their profits, the chicken roll, which is the new alternative to the sausage roll.
Okay.
And matcha.
Oh,
no,
goodness,
I've
no, thank you, Greggs.
idea what that is.
No, it's not worth knowing.
Is it not?
What does this tell us then about, businesses, UK business as a whole? And I was just thinking about the national insurance increases from the budget last year, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That it always strikes me that business has massive lobbying power, big business particularly, when it comes to government decisions. And it's surprising somewhat that a government like this that seems to want stability and listen to business have managed to push something through which is so unpopular with businesses and has resulted in so many layoffs and difficulties. So how does that work?
I guess if you remember, we did a podcast, didn't we, on that budget last year, and the Labour manifesto had said they would not increase taxes on working people, and I don't think there was anywhere else for them to go other than to increase taxes on those employing working people.
So does that tell us that governments have a lot more autonomy than we think they do, and sometimes we can be a little bit skeptical and think that they're just in the pockets of big business?
Yeah, I think that is true. Yeah, I mean, I actually wish government would listen to business more.
Really?
I don't think. I mean, clearly, a lot of businesses do a lot of lobbying of government, and presumably they did that before the budget last year. But I don't necessarily agree with the decision the government made. But I think it's right that government should stand up to lobbying sometimes. And I don't think that they necessarily do always do what business wants them to do.
Well, clearly.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I mean, one thing is business aren't voters, are they?
Yeah.
It's people who vote, not businesses.
Yeah. That's the importance of making the government accountable to the people at election time and in between, rather than just big corporations and such.
Yeah.
Okay, and does the Greggs story tell us anything about sort of the landscape for British business and where we're going and growth and that sort of thing? Or
yeah, I mean, one of the things that Greggs said in their announcement was that obviously it would be better for them if people had more money in their pocket to spend, and clearly there's still an extent to which people are cutting back on what they might see as things like luxuries of getting a takeaway on your way to work rather than having a slice of toast before you leave for work.
A side note is money in your pocket is my least favourite political metaphor. I find that it's the classic, when they're on the debate stage, and it's like, and it's a classic Tory thing as well. It's like putting more money into people's pockets. I'm like, but it's not actually putting more money into people's pockets. But anyway, sorry.
I feel like you've called me a Tory now.
Yeah, you've called me worse. But when people are feeling that they're struggling, they're less likely to go and pay for things like takeaways. Is that what
exactly.
the analysis is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I suppose it tells us that. But I think the thing that I think is the most important lesson to take from it is that Greggs is willing to stand up to those fund managers who say you should be cutting costs more, you should be taking on more debt. And those are the ways in which businesses have worked for the last 20 years. They've not been investing in new technologies, investing in people, using profits that they make to reinvest further in the business rather than just borrowing from money markets. And I actually think, good on you, Greggs, for standing up to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the way that we are taught about business in schools, when you have those, if you ever played that game where you have pencils and the other table has pens and they have scissors and you've got to trade. You ever do that at school?
No.
It's quite fun. But the way we conceptualise business is more along the Greggs model.
Yeah.
They're making a profit, so they'll reinvest that profit. And what we I think a lot of us, and part of the reason why people feel the way they do nowadays in 2026 is that a lot of these things have become so convoluted, and businesses are making money off things that isn't what they're, the widgets that they're selling or making. And we need to, I think, have more businesses like Greg's, like Denby. I've now got a Denby bowl.
Oh, lovely. Great. Good.
If I'd been talking about Denby today instead of a few weeks ago, I could parade it. But we need to have more businesses like that. I mean, the Greg's story for me is this has been relevant since we read Vassal State by Angus Hansen, talking about how a lot of British businesses have been bought up by American companies of varying sizes as well. This is the confusing thing. I've always had this slight bias against big companies, and now I realise that actually, however big you are, there's a chance that you're owned by an American company and listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And it's difficult now to know where you should be going to spend your money. And Greg's is one of those that in the past, it was a big chain, I won't shop at Greg's. And now I'm thinking, actually, maybe Greg's an example of a good British company. Is there something that this is my last question, I promise. Is there something that governments should be doing to incentivise businesses to pursue that Greg's model and to push back against these big investment funds? Or is it in the business's interests in the long run anyway, and therefore more businesses will start to do what Greg's is doing?
I think some of the things that the government has done have been helpful. So things like you can write off investment in the business against your tax liability straight away. I think that's good. And I think, more things like that would be welcome. And I think we've talked before, haven't we, about things like, it would be great if we could have more of a buy British kind of culture in the UK. And I think government could be the people who push that and make sure that we do help to nurture and build those British businesses so that we're not always reliant on the US.
Yeah. I think a Business Transparency Act calling for all businesses to make it clear who they're owned by. And so that when I think we always underestimate the lengths individual citizens will go to spend their money in places they want to spend it.
Yeah.
For businesses they think are more decent.
Yes.
And we think, people are just searching for the cheapest, highest quality goods. But actually, I think so many of us are willing to go to one place over another based off, how do they treat their staff, who are they owned by, etc.
Exactly. Absolutely that. Good.
Very good. Well, that was a hefty one, a hefty news episode today.
Yes.
There's lots to talk about.
Indeed, yeah. So hope people enjoyed that.
The link, by the way, from Greg's to what I was talking about is that there was an MP, I believe a Conservative MP called Greg Pope. And you know how on the ballots it'll be, so for my name, it'll be more Sebastian.
Yeah.
He claimed apparently that a lot of people were voting for him, a lot of Catholics in his constituency, because it said Pope Greg and they thought he was Pope Gregory. So there you go.
Great.
That's the link to Greg's.
Great. Good. Okay, so we will see you next week. As always, recommend the podcast and share it with your friends. And thanks for listening.